Sarah, look, I've gone down your list. I'm not a sir. I'm not a dame. I haven't broken any land speed records. I'm not an astronaut. But I hope you enjoy the talk anyway. And it's lovely to be here. I stood in front of you all in the other building at this time last year and did the Space Agency address. And I said there that Annalise and I were new to the Space Agency. And I just wanted to start by reflecting on our first year here. Because someone told me many, many years ago, it wasn't recently, you can't go and work in the Space Agency. That's for space people, which was an interesting angle. And that was someone said to me that 5 years ago. That is absolutely not true. And that idea that space is for everyone. I wanted to say a huge thank you. Many of the people in the audience are people that we've met as we've been around, you've welcomed us into your world. And it's been lovely. And I want to say thank you on behalf of Annalise and myself for that welcome. Space truly is a nice place to work, and that's down to you. Thank you for the introduction, Sarah. And yeah, 25 years in defence and security. And I sort of feel like my career's been defined by three. Sorry, how do I go back? I didn't mean to do that. No, that's going forward. Apologies. Oh, no, you've seen it all now. There we go. Nice to see you. I'll see you next year. By three events. I started work as a flight test engineer at Boscombe Down shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall. I went to America and worked in the British Embassy in Washington a few years after 9/11. And now I come to the Space Agency, not that many years after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I think my observation is that the world is more volatile, the world is more unpredictable, and in many respects, the world is a more dangerous place than it's been for a long time. And I think that is not the fault of anybody here, but it's the reality. I'd call you to the, if you see BBC News this morning, Tony Radakin, who's the Chief of the Defence Staff, was talking last night about a third nuclear age. Even leaving aside the nuclear angle, definitely worth having a read of what he was saying, because he's very much echoing, well, perhaps I'm echoing him because he's the Chief of the Defence Staff, but the same point. We have to worry about national security. Paul's going to talk later on, and his talk is entitled A Beacon of Hope, which I think is a lovely expression which brings together why space is such a powerful thing. But having a beacon of hope brings with it a responsibility. And we collectively have a responsibility for security. And the title of my talk, Space is National Security. It's not a thing that's used to help defence do stuff which supports national security and defence of the nation. Because all the work that you have been doing, and Sarah and I were talking about the RAL story earlier, it's gone for like 60 years. Because of that work, we have created this almost insidious dependency now upon space. And we all know how much our society is reliant upon the use of space. But that brings a responsibility as well. We can't any longer think about a rather simplistic definition of this is civilian space. And over there is defense space. And we've got this little intersection in the middle of the Venn diagram, and we'll call it dual use. And we'll give it special attention. But frankly, we sort of go back to our own worlds and carry on almost as if nothing had happened once we've done a bit of a show and tell. I'm paraphrasing, but that's sort of the feeling I had from my perspective, sat inside the MOD for many years. I think the reality today is quite the opposite. That the Venn diagram is almost completely overlapped. It's very, very hard, and I'm happy to be challenged in the coffee break on this quiz question, very hard to think of a technology or a person or an organization, but particularly a technology that is exclusively a civilian technology or exclusively a defense technology. That's a reality, and we have to live and work with that reality. So I'll give you a quick spin through some of the challenges we see ahead. So if I move on. The government publishes a risk register, and 4 of the risks on that national risk register are related to space. You can see them there. Some of them are quite obvious, and we've talked for a long time. There's the Blackett report about precision navigation and timing, our dependency on that. But see the words about disruption of space-based services. That could be through natural events, space weather, for example, space debris, for example. But look at the bottom one, the deliberate disruption of UK space systems. And back to my sort of defining points of my career, as my career has gone on, conflict has been increasingly asymmetric. People will not take on America and the West at a peer-to-peer level. They are much happier and much more effective by looking at ways to disrupt or influence our society. And I think space, because of its unique vantage point, its omniscient position, its ubiquitous global satcoms, is particularly vulnerable to that, and it gives us a responsibility to think about security. So this is published, it's open source. You can go to the internet and see the government's risk register. I don't expect you to read this. Maybe in the front row you can. This was some analysis that we did looking at the dependency of space on our life today. And when I talk about security, by the way, I'm not talking about the military. That's part of it. But national security is protecting our way of life, protecting what we cherish, the freedoms that we've worked hard to maintain that perhaps are more challenged elsewhere in the globe. That's what we mean by national security. And it covers all of these areas. If you can't read it, it goes through water, food, transport, finance, health, the nuclear power business, government, energy, chemical, emergency services, communications, and the colours in the pie chart show an analysis of the relative importance. The point being, Earth observation, satellite communications, and GNSS, which are the things around the outside, impact nearly every one of those things in some shape or form, which means that if they're not there, or they are disrupted, or somebody with malign intent wants to disrupt them, then we have a challenge. We have a national challenge. And I'll come back to a day without space next. Cartoon's been a bit stretched. I thought it was Christmas rather than showing a PowerPoint slide, lots of bullets. This is a load of people on the street in New York looking at their phones, wondering why their deliveries haven't arrived, working out how to get home, not being able to navigate. I was talking about a day without space to some colleagues in Space Command, and they said, you got it wrong, Chris. We're talking about the first day without space. Of course, the really scary one is the second and the third and the fourth day without space. Look what happened in COVID, where supply chains starting to get disrupted. That was for a different reason. But if you lose precision timing, or you lose ability to navigate, our logistic systems on which our society relies are utterly dependent upon that. So a day without space is just the beginning. And actually, we're going to try and run some exercises next year to raise that awareness. Because of that, what I think is almost an insidious dependency that our society has now got. I don't need to ask this audience. When I talk to other groups, I start often with put your hand up if you've used space today. You'll all put your hand up so you understand it, but often only about a quarter of the audience do it. Then you go through, well, did you see a weather forecast? Did you navigate here with Google Maps? Did you conduct a financial transaction? Have you been on the internet? All of those things get jeopardized if you have a day or a second day or a third day without space. And we saw in COVID how very fragile our systems are as well, and how quite vulnerable we are to some of these disruptions. What we think needs to happen is not to say this is somebody else's problem, not to say we've got an MOD to do that sort of stuff. This has to be our problem, our collective challenge as a community, to work out how we can respond to that almost the result of the great work that you've all done to create this amazing dependency that our society has upon space. But how do we protect it and think about a security perspective? And I'm not just talking about the classics of classification of documents or whatever, but everything that you do contributes to national security. If you're in academia, you're one level the fertile ground into which the young people who are passionate about space grow. Some of those people will end up working in things which support national security. You have a fundamental role to play. The research that you do in academia. One thing, I can't remember, Paul or someone might know, maybe it was Paul Drayson or someone said that there was no sector which better connects or is more integrally connected between academia, industry, the user and application. And I think that very much echoes my point here. The instruments you develop in academia and so on. But that goes around through companies who build things, through people who operate the satellites, through the people who use the data. Are we thinking enough about keeping that secure and resilient? And I liken this a little bit to cyber. So you'll know there's something called the National Cyber Security Centre. 10 or 15 years ago, a few people knew about cyber security. It's a bit annoying if you got a phishing email and your granny clicked the link and crashed a new computer or something. every organisation now will have somebody who worries about cybersecurity. Every organisation will have a connection to the National Cybersecurity Centre and receive those alerts. What about in space? How are we doing that? I think that's a collective challenge that we have to take on together. But my point being, back to my notion of the Venn diagram, that it's now almost completely overlapped. Very few people can say it's not my problem. Just a quick example of one very practical thing that we're doing. This is sort of my version of Sarah's 2024 year. The National Space Operations Centre, we're hugely proud of this. It's based at RAF High Wycombe, but it's a joint effort between ourselves, Space Command, and in partnership with the Met Office. They do all those things on the right-hand side, and they provide an amazing service free of charge to UK satellite operators to help them avoid issues and risks and collisions and so on. They provide alerts and so on. Really, really impressive setup and a lovely example of how organisations can work together. When you go and visit, you don't really know whether you're talking to a space agency person. We do know the RAF people who've got uniform on, but you know what I mean. The way they talk and the way the team operates, utterly integrated. They are about security of space fundamentally. And that's just a sort of an illustration. I was going to show you that lovely video. You've probably seen it on YouTube. I can try and sort of describe the edited highlights. So this was an example of the Russian anti-satellite test that was done in November 2021, so 3 years ago. And what basically happens when you see the video is the satellite comes over the horizon. This is around the North Pole area somewhere, because it carries on down into America. And you see the launch of the anti-satellite weapon. The point being that the red stuff is the debris field. 1,779 bits of debris got created by that. And those are the ones we could track. So not obviously all of it, all moving at whatever it is, 17,500 miles an hour. Last week, 3 and a bit years later, the last bit of debris from that incident re-entered the Earth's atmosphere that we can track. That's just one example of if there were some kind of incident in space. Now, thank goodness, that didn't really impact very much. Maybe that's to do with the orbit, maybe that's to do with the situation at the time, but it won't take many events like that, and then the knock-on effects, the Kessler thing, to really threaten the resilience of low Earth orbit. That's just an example. That was just one act that was taken 3 years ago, and you can watch that on YouTube. So I would like to finish off. I've nicked one phrase from Paul, which is about the beacon of hope. I'll nick another one now, which is about walking towards the challenge. So we cannot solve this challenge in the UK Space Agency. The MOD, while an amazing organisation, can't solve it on its own. We all have a part to play. Even the people in this room, if we had the best brains, can't solve. This is a global challenge. We in the Space Agency want to be part of that global debate. We are very activist about this being a really, really important issue. We want to bring people together. But it's your ingenuity, the same ingenuity that led to the 60 years of RAL space, the same ingenuity that created that dependency now needs to be turned to keeping it secure. So it's not just us that can enjoy the benefits of space, our children and their children in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much indeed. So we've got lots of time for questions. Can I just ask that you wait, when you have a question, please wait for somebody with a roving mic to come to you so that the people online can hear the question. So first of all, hands raised if you've got a question for Chris. I know there will be many.
Good way of getting the hands in case stay down, isn't it?
There we go. I would say the people with the mics have got their running shoes on, but they're not allowed to run for health and safety reasons.
You mentioned raising awareness. How do you assess general awareness across politics now?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think the awareness in the political sphere sort of mirrors that in broader society. I think there's generally, back to my sort of straw poll, have you used space today? How many hands go up in the room if it was a group of lay people? I think we have a job to do to make the case for why space is an intrinsic part of national security. I think there's some good ways of bringing that to life, playing out what the first day and the second day and the third day without space looks like. But I think our politicians do get this. I think the officials that work with them, particularly places in the Cabinet Office and so on, do understand this. But as ever, people move over, people turn over in jobs. And one of the challenges in our government is people turn over jobs often very quickly. Keeping that message alive is a really important thing. And we're on that mission to keep that message alive. But all of you can do that. This is not just us at political level. Do it in the pub, do it in the coffee shop, do it in the canteen around the corner. Keep talking about it. It is important. And the more we can raise that awareness, the better, I think.
Question right at the back there.
Hello. You talked quite a bit about security, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how the UK can leverage its position and its influence in its areas where it has strength to maintain space sustainability.
Yes. So I should have perhaps defined what I mean by security a bit more rigorously at the start. So I see the sustainable use and availability of space as being fundamental to national security. It's logical. If you think space is national security, it has to be sustainable. So as you probably know, sustainability is super important to us. It's one of our three big purposes in the space agency, is protecting our planet and outer space. We're very active, as you probably know, on the world stage with that through the United Nations for developing the technology, some of which is just around the corner here in Harwell. So yeah, extraordinarily important. Sustainability at all kinds of levels, be it carbon footprint, debris and carrying capacity in low Earth orbit. And then the really big future challenges about sustainability of things like the lunar economy and beyond. So yeah, absolutely at the heart of what we do. And that's why it's one of the three big purposes that we have in our mission at the Space Agency.
Thanks very much. Joanna Hart from the Space Partnership. You've obviously got experience now of actually starting to bring both the civil and defence side together through NSPOC. What are the practical challenges? Because there's obviously a messaging piece that's got to happen, but then there's actually how do we start to deliver this? How do we make sure that collectively as a space sector, from a defence, civil, more all across government, that we're actually making a difference and able to put those innovative solutions in?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Joanna. So I think it's a layered thing, actually. NSPOC is sort of a point example of joint working. This is actually about fundamental policy. It's about setting a national policy for space, which is coherent across defence. Don't forget the intelligence community as well, a large user and consumer of space data, other parts of government and so on. So there's sort of a policy level. I think for the industrial people in the audience, there's a very practical thing here. And I spent a lot of my career in defence doing acquisition and big program management and continually being told by small companies, it's just too hard to work with the MOD, be that through the acquisition processes, be that through security classifications or whatever. I think finding a way where industry can play in this game in an equitable fashion. Capabilities, being really clear what capabilities we believe the nation needs in order to be a spacefaring nation and to deliver our national objectives. And as you know, we're doing some really good work collectively with the MOD and other parts of government defining those capabilities. We do not want to have a technology plan for civilian space and a tech roadmap for defence space. The other point I made just to finish off, and for those of you in MOD, you'll get this, but for the rest of you, when we say capability, we don't mean a bit of kit or a satellite. We mean all the things that come together, be that the people, the training, the organisation, the doctrine, the infrastructure, the logistics, and the technology, and the equipment, and the operational support. Defence call it lines of development, other nations have different titles, but a capability needs to be seen in the round. So I think talking a common capability language across the community is important as well. Then the sort of final level down about technology and so on, back to my point about not wanting separate technology roadmaps, one roadmap. Let's work out who's best placed to push that technology forward. Let's have a master plan for how we want to deliver this capability across our government. So it's
So-
practical things. Really happy to talk more. There's loads of practical ideas as well.
Two points to be made. One, Alex, your hand's been up, and then gentleman at the front here, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to call it to a halt. I know you're going to be around in the break,
And
so
lunch,
please, and lunch, perfect. So there's plenty of opportunity. Alex.
Hi, Alex Davis, founder of the IOP Space Group. You mentioned that the world seems more dangerous today than it did maybe 10 years ago. And I was wondering, what sorts of things do you think have contributed towards that?
Crikey, that's a big question. I'll try and keep it sort of a bit space focused, but I think the utter dominance that America and its related allies and through defense technology had pretty much put an end to any concept of peer-to-peer competition, apart from maybe in some specific areas of the world where there is some pretty advanced technology. But for most actors, the notion of taking on the West, if I can use that term, at a peer-to-peer level, it's become unrealistic, which meant people become very inventive with 9/11. Disruption, some of the asymmetric warfare things that we've seen. There were some excellent people in the audience, Mr. Watkins being one, who can talk to you about that at the coffee break, who has an excellent perspective. But I think it's things like that. I think it's this idea that people don't respect the difference between civilian and defence things. They will do what they need to do to provide the influence to meet their particular objectives, be that disrupt an election, be that disrupt space services. So I just think that idea of asymmetry, and I think the information revolution now, where we are so much more interconnected as a world, makes that sort of thing easier. But there's a whole conversation like this around AI and its influence on information networks. It makes a vulnerability as well, which we have to be cognizant of.
Challenging question to answer. Well done. Final question.
We're doing an easy one to finish with.
Hi, my name's Jonathan Eastwood. I work at Imperial College, and as of last week, I'm the new director of our school, which is on space security and telecommunications. And we formed this to fuse aeronautics, physics, electrical engineering, and computing, particularly for this exact problem. And I wanted to ask about this overlapping Venn diagram. What do you think is the most important sovereign capability that we need to work on?
That's a good question. I don't think there is a most important one, if I can slightly dodge the question. But I think if you look at the wheel I showed right at the start, certainly precision timing is an obvious one. I think the ability to do ubiquitous global communications enabled by satellites, where increasingly we're not seeing there's the defense SATCOM satellite and there's the commercial Starlink or whatever it is, but we're seeing a mixture of the two. So definitely in SATCOMs. Earth observation, defense might use the language, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance of man, it's the same thing, same technology. So those are some examples of the area. And I think just back to my point about the information revolution, it's quite easy, especially for an audience like this, to sort of zoom in on the spaceship and the instruments and the solar panels and the launch and the rockets and stuff like that. This is just a means to an end. This is about what you do with the data and the information in a world where we're going to see an utter revolution in the connectivity and the networking and so on. We haven't seen anything yet. Our generation has not seen anything yet in terms of what AI and the connected network can bring. How space plays that part in taking data back to Earth and using it, I think that's a really poorly defined and understood thing. But if I'm looking for a future one, that would be the one I'd add. So sorry, you asked one, you got four.